It's my absolute pleasure. I don't know, perhaps we should have it in English. You don't speak Farsi, do you? No. Okay, then let's have it in English. Welcome. It's my absolute pleasure to host all of you here and also our fantastic speaker. This event is hosted by Cambridge University Persian Society. I guess the rest of you guys know about the society. A little bit of housekeeping business before we get to the talk. As you guys know, we have a lot of events planned for the rest of the year, for the rest of our election year. We have tea gun celebration, barbecue celebration coming next week. We have limited number of, not seats, but spaces available. If you like to come, please sign up. The sooner the better. We also have a few of talks planned for the rest of these 3 months, and also Nehregan and the other celebrations. So keep being involved. And also, what I actually wanted to get to ask is if you are affiliated to any of the colleges, and if you are willing to help us in any way, in any form and shape, we are gladly welcoming you to help us with any of the events. Even a talk event like this one, if you can actually book us a room in your one of your colleges, that would be great. That aside, let's get to the talk for today. Okay, I really didn't want to be the president, but obviously it was pushed by the other people. The person that actually didn't even show up today. When I actually flirting with the idea to become president was, if I become president, I can invite people that I love, the topic that I love. And the day that actually I nominated myself, I had 2 people in mind to invite. The first person I emailed the very first night after election. It hasn't happened yet. I'm very hopeful that that person, I have the pleasure to host that person here in Cambridge during my post at COPS. The second one is our speaker for today. Being born in the 80s in Iran, I guess all of us are sort of political in a way. Being raised during war and after revolution, and your childhood is tied with reforms in Iran and also Ahmadinejad when you are a teenager or when you are early adult life. It's sort of forced you to become involved in politics. I, like any other person in my generation, I consider myself that I'm very involved in politics. I follow the politics more than a normal average non-Iranian person does. That's the lie that I was telling myself. Very recently I realized that no, that's not what every single Iranian does. It's just me being political junkie. I follow the news from South America to North Korea, South Korea, and Japan. I follow elections in every single country in Europe. And I realized that that's the only way to pay off, to invite a person to actually put everything in perspective for me. I can talk about my passion to define myself, but I stand left or right. I constantly tell myself that when it comes to social issues, there's not enough left in the left for me. But I dabble with the idea that I'm right or left when it comes to economy, political economy. It depends on the country. I change my side. I guess there's only me that did the PhD in biology, managed to bring the topic to criticize Piketty for the PhD. I didn't tell you that part. I saved that part for now. During my PhD. So I thought that to put everything, all of my passions from every angle of my life in perspective, there's no better person than our speaker for today. Our speaker, I hope that I pronounced the last name close enough, Yassamine Mather. Like me, is not educated in politics. It's involved with science and engineering, but I guess we share this interest in common that find something else outside of our work to be passionate about. She pursued that, and she became she's the active editor of a academic journal Critique at Oxford. It's, I guess, the most serious left academic journal in Oxford. It's my utmost pleasure to host you for today, and I'm very happy that you made one of my dreams came true came to talk to us for today. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Mather for the talk today, and we are all off here.
I can only disappoint us. It's a wonderful introduction. Okay, I realize this is a Saturday evening and you really don't want to hear about political economy and what has caused Brexit and Trump in less than, 2.5 years. But this is the topic, so I can only address that. I have a friend who normally starts his talks in order to set it in a historic scene, because we do need history. Everyone keeps telling me we need to set things in history. I think he starts usually in 1648, which is the English Revolution, 1648, sometimes in the 12th century. You'll be very glad to hear that for a Saturday evening, I'm only starting in the Second World War, 1945 onwards. But I do have to start in 1945, because most of you will not know what has brought the current political and economic, in my opinion, disaster, but some people say crisis that we are facing now. And in order to see it, we have to start, I think, in 1945. It also is the start of the ascendancy of the United States as the hegemon power. It's when the United States becomes the world top dog, so to speak. You know the history, Germany is defeated, Japan is defeated, but I want you to look at the political and economic scene immediately after this war. So the scene we're looking at is one of construction, building up, spending, the Marshall Plan in most of Europe. It's to reconstruct, and two items, military expenditure because of the Cold War, and the second one, the concept of, if you like, reconstructing destroyed countries. Half of London is bombed out, half of European capitals are destroyed. That gives an incentive to expand, to use capital to invest and to spend more and more money. And it is, I'm glad you mentioned Piketty, it is the one Thomas Piketty refers to as the golden years of capitalism. This is when Europe can spend because it's earning a lot, because there is construction, because capital is growing, but it's also when both in fear of the Soviet Union, but in addition, because of demands from inside their own country, the United Kingdom being one, France being another, the welfare programs are quite generous. That is the beginning of the welfare state. So we have social democratic policies, Labour comes to power despite Churchill's victory and so on. So the scene is one of positive outlook to the rest of the world. And there is capitalist development in the third world. There is a need for that because there is you are thinking of exporting. In order to export, you need a more educated class, you need the middle classes in the developing world. Everything is working towards building that momentum. And there are a number of international institutions created at that time that are supporting the United States as the hegemon power. Right? I mention this because we now face a president, Mr. Trump, who is saying, why are we paying too much for NATO? Well, you have to understand why the United States is paying more for NATO. There's no doubt about it. NATO was built to maintain the United States as the hegemon world power. And it's only fair under such circumstances that the country that is assuming that position should pay more. Not only is it earning more, it hasn't spent as much during the Second World War, and is now in a position, obviously, to expand and pay for that. So NATO is formed in 1949 because the United States wants it. Okay, Canada, Western Europe joins it. But the competitor of the Soviet Union as the defender of the free world is the United States. And that has been the case since then. until Trump said, why are we paying too much for it? We have the European Economic Market, or the EEC, the European Economic Community, with the Rome Treaty, which is also the start of what became later the European Union with the Maastricht Treaty. But the start of it is the European Economic Community. And who wants Britain to join the European community? United States. Successive US presidents are telling British prime ministers, why aren't you in the European community? Because the European community is the defender of the interests of the United States in Central Europe, in Western Europe. It is also the economic combatant against the Warsaw Pact countries. So the scene is also set for the setting up of free healthcare. A national health service is set up in the United Kingdom in 1946. And we see what one would call relative wealth for the majority of the working population. This doesn't mean everyone is benefiting, but the working class that sends their sons and daughters to fight for a war from between 1939 and 1945 asks for more. It's always the case that if you've made sacrifices, you ask for more, and in response to this, then the state is giving more. That's why there is free education, that's why there is free health. It's I would say, a normal consequence of what happens. The problem then arises where, and this remains the constant fear of, in my opinion, economic order that we live in. The problem then arises that people demand more because they compare themselves to others. I don't know if you've seen, there is a very funny video from Monty Python, which has become a poster, and there's an aristocratic guy, a middle class guy, and a working class guy. And it shows the differences between the three, and he knows he's not earning as much as the upper class guy and the working class guy. So obviously class becomes an issue because people are comparing income. And it is in this respect that we see a demand for better wages towards the end of that period, towards mid-1970s, even late 1960s, right? It also coincides, this is quite a, if you like, a rebellious period worldwide. The Vietnam War, the United States loses the Vietnam War in 1975. It is a major loss. There are Americans who are still obsessed about 1975. You can't put a limit to it. And then there is 1968, the rebellion of the youth, universities being a place where the youth are asking for other, not other systems, but other lives. And at the same time, we have, for example, car workers in France demanding better wages, the miners in the United Kingdom demanding a better life, maybe a better standard of living for their children. The demand for better wages has no end to it. And I think it is the realization of this period that makes monetarism the dominant political line of the ruling classes. For the ruling class, this is the disaster. They cannot continue, and I can understand that you can't continue paying more and more because then there isn't enough money, or there isn't. You can come into issues such as growth. There is lack of growth, there is lack of development, and so on. So what we have is, I think, the start of quite a few economic gurus. They were called economic gurus at the time. One of the main ones, Milton Friedman, is the economic mind that sets the agenda for Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Very much the Boris Johnson and Trump of their era. And the praise is for the free market, the laissez-faire economy. during these golden 40 years, I don't think they are golden, but Piketty calls them golden. Let's say they were golden. During these 40 years, the state was the, if you have, mediator between class differences. The state was the one that gave, that was introducing social welfare, was responsible. So the argument was put forward that you really need supply and demand. You're interfering too much. Stop interfering. The state takes a step back and let the economy flourish. The theory was that in those circumstances, in what became later known as neoliberal economy, the absence of huge taxes will encourage major development, that everyone will invest, however small amount of money they would invest, because there would be no tax in investment. And then you would remove tariffs, you would remove subsidies, basically an unregulated system. The state's role was what the state's role has always been, one of the guarantor of private property. That was the essential role that people saw for the state. It would make sure through its police, through its presence, that private property was not in danger. And at the time, there were people saying, this is it, we found the nirvana. This is going to save not just the investing classes, but everyone else. However, for this plan to work, it wasn't just going to be in Europe. It had to be an international, worldwide policy. And we have people like Alan Greenspan, who at the time he was an academic, then became chair of the Federal Reserve in the US. He was saying, this is the concept of free movements of goods, services, and capital. Money could travel. Before that, you had monetary control. If you wanted to send, I don't know, 10,000 pounds to France, your government could stop you, could say, no, what are you going to do with this? After that, the whole, if you like, that whole barrier about sending money abroad, the protectionism of national states all went away, and neoliberalism became the agenda. Now, all of these, you would have thought, if capital is free to move, people should be free to move. That wasn't the case. That wasn't the case until much later in the European Union. These are really important because I think you have to understand the mindset of Brexit and immigration. For those of you who haven't lived in this country as long as I have, it's a bit difficult to see it the way it came about. Then the problem was that you had mines where the workers were earning quite a lot of money. And the left started, even the left was saying these are the aristocracy of the working class, worldwide looking, right? So that a miner in Britain was probably earning the wage of a major manager in Tehran. That was the comparison. And that couldn't go on. The car worker was considered a skilled worker and therefore earned a lot of money. And so the concept was brought out that, and this was discussed openly by people like Reagan, Thatcher, and so on, that we would move industrial production to where the labor force was the cheapest. So we constantly moved to cheaper and cheaper places. For example, if you look at textile, they started moving textile factories to places like Turkey, to places such as Egypt. Then China was even cheaper. Vietnam is now, I understand, cheaper than China. So let's move it further and further away. And this is an inevitable consequence of pursuing maximum economic benefit. So there was a rationale to it. But what it left in the countries of the advanced capitalist countries were devastated areas. I don't think any of us who have lived in Oxford or Cambridge can imagine what it looks like to live in somewhere like Kirkcaldy in Scotland, where the mining community has been completely destroyed, devastation of that community. And in that men of a certain age have no job, there is no prospect of a job, and the generation is growing up with no prospect of a job. there will never be jobs in places such places. And there are mining villages like that, probably from Yorkshire up to London, I would say. But that wasn't important. I think for people like Thatcher, that really didn't matter. That was not part of the discussion. The discussion was, where can we do the cheapest labor? And by destroying the two main, if you like, united unions, or what were considered radical workers' unions, the miners' union, and later the car workers, and to a certain extent the dockers, you made sure there was never going to be a rebellion by workers for better wages. There hasn't been one since the 1970s. Forget about small protest here, small protest there. There really hasn't been a major economic strike, never mind politics, economic strike, centrally organized, nationally united in the United Kingdom since that period. So, if you like, that policy of neoliberal economic policy was a success. For example, for the ruling class, it was a success. It created with it, and again, we have to see this in the context of what's being challenged now. It created with it international organizations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. These were the arbiters of this free flow of capital. The arbiters of this free flow of capitals that were also responsible for making sure, in the long term, you could have a situation where the working class of those other countries where the labor was being moved to had jobs, money was being sent. There was a international regulation of this. So the IMF clearly boosted of having 189 countries now it says it regulates global monetary cooperation. I'm not sure what people who are facing the crisis of currency exchange in Iran will think of it, but that's what its responsibility is. Its responsibility is to foster global monetary cooperation and secure financial stability. Right? So these are all its own declared tasks. One of its main policies was that this neoliberal economy couldn't just work if it was just Europe and advanced capitalist countries. The same policy with the same regulation had to be followed in other countries. So you had to have structural adjustments in Iran, for example, or in Pakistan. You had to have structural adjustments in Tunis. You had to have reconstruction, abolition of subsidies, the end of state-owned industries. It must be all very familiar to you. You must have heard it before. Privatization, selling off of assets. These were all part of this era. They are still part of this era because the IMF is still powerful, because we still live, despite Trump and Boris Johnson and Brexit, we still live in a neoliberal economic capital system in general. But that was the idea. And during this period, the World Bank was also giving loans to encourage lots of countries to become major economic centers. And in order to, if you like, balance the gap between the third world, the south and the north, there were a lot of talks about we need to improve the situation of everybody else and so on. There was, throughout this period, countries that came up or were introduced as economic tigers. I'm not quite sure why they chose the word tiger, why not lion, but they were all tigers. So we had the Asian tigers. Then we had Ireland, which was going to be the economic miracle of the 21st century. We had the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, Ireland, India, China, and South Africa. So they were all, you're too young, some of you, most of you are too young, but the BRICS were going to be the leading, G20 will go away, they would be the world power. All of these tigers flopped at one stage or another. There were people taking bets on how long it would take for each of them, but to be honest, all of them had a few peaks and then they died down. countries that benefited were the very advanced industrial countries. And I don't think the IMF or the World Bank were there for distribution of this through the third world. There was an adjustment, and that adjustment, I think, referred to the elite in the developing countries. The elite in the developing countries became part of this global capital. So the difference that you would see in terms of class, in terms of economy, between, say, an upper class British person and a working class British person existed between an upper class British person and an upper class Indian, for example. But the Indian capitalists became almost as rich as the British ones, right? So the elite became a class of its own, international, with global finance, and that defined neoliberalism in many ways. There wasn't, if you like, open racism as long as you had economic power. Many people are now saying, well, it's surprising, for example, X or Y is Asian and he's a minister. That's not really that strange. Some of the biggest capitalists of the world are of Asian or Middle Eastern or other nationalities. It's the money that matters, it's not. I think it has changed. So what changed in all of this? This was a wonderful world. Everyone was happy, except the poor workers had lost their jobs from Yorkshire to Dundee. And I say Dundee because after Dundee in Scotland, there's almost nothing, because I'm disrespectful. But during this wonderful period, we also witnessed a number of, if you like, standard bubble bursting crises. These are standard crises. Capitalism expands, capitalism creates a bubble, the bubble bursts, but then it continues, right? There's no, if you like, there's no disaster after. So what were those? I'm just mentioning them one by one, just to name them. There's Black Monday, which affected the US, then affected the UK. One minister had to go. I mean, in the UK, this was quite serious. You know, people lost their jobs and so on. Then we had the Asian financial crisis of 1997. That's when the Asian tigers became Asian mouse or whatever, mice or whatever. Then we had the dot-com bubble. If you remember, there was this in 2000 and 2001. California was going to save the world. There was going to be an economic miracle in the US by the creation of these new industries. And that bubble burst, and that was a bit of a problem. Nothing prepared the economies of the world for the events that happened in 2007 to 2009, culminating in 2008. And again, most of you would have no recollection of that, but it really changed the world in many ways, because this was not a crisis of the kind we witnessed before. It was dramatically different. It affected, I think, most of the European countries. It affected initially the United States, but also it changed the perception that everything was going to get better all the time, even for the people who had so far benefited from this. So, what was it? Well, I'm sure you've heard all various stories about this. I can't give a scientific or mathematically correct, detailed analysis of it. Journals, there's so many articles, and there are so many different opinions. But I think one thing is agreed by most people. The mortgages that the banks in the United States were giving to people were beyond the capabilities of most of those people. In addition to this, there was an expansion into derivatives, i.e. second indexes associated with these mortgages, that financial institutions were actually betting on. So your bank had given, I don't know, 100 million loan. There was a financial institution where you had actually paid them maybe who was betting on whether you would ever get this 100 million, and therefore was in its financial and monetary interest to make sure you wouldn't get it, because they could get 200 million because of your loss. It was a house of cards. The fact that this laissez-faire economy that I mentioned earlier could reach a stage where people could literally bet on the future of other people was an inevitable consequence, but no one had predicted it. As you know, Queen Elizabeth went to London School of Economics and asked the eminent professors in the London School of Economics, how many of you had predicted this? And they were all quiet and silent. There were economists, especially in this university, and we have to pay credit to them, who had said this is madness, and they had said it throughout the years of the neoliberal economy. Probably one of the early institutions in the Western capitalist world. That had, they were not all of your economists, but some of them had actually made that point. But who had listened? I mean, who cared? You know, the world was getting
story of our lives. Nobody cares about that.
Richer and richer. Why worry about it? So this crisis affected everyone. I mean, in the city of London, banks were shutting. People were going out. In the United Kingdom, people were queuing at ATMs and they couldn't get their money out. So it was, for the first time, so this wasn't just a bubble bursting. This was something quite dramatic. For the first time, I think the system thought maybe there is a possibility of a meltdown. And states got involved. After all these years of saying, well, the state has to stop subsidies, not getting, all the states got involved. And they got involved from the right and the left. Ideology went off, nobody cared. For example, George Bush was as much involved in trying to bail out various things as Gordon Brown. In this country, the conservatives are very clear. They say, oh, if it's Gordon Brown's fault or whatever. Nobody. It was saving the national bank of the country. And in order to save the national bank of your country, your currency, your existence, you have to make sure you helped around all the banks. So they were helping around all the banks. There was I don't think there was any doubt about that. And in some ways, you could say they saved the order, they saved the system, because the system went on. There wasn't a collapse of the economy, there were recessions, there was stagnation. Right? Those recessions, we can see the effects of it even now, because you can't see people enthusiastic about investment, and that is serious. That's a problem. They are not keen on investment, not just in Iran because there is sanctions, not just in Pakistan because it's neighboring Afghanistan. There is a lack of incentive for industrial or financial investment. And that's a continuation of that stagnation. I had some notes, but after your email, I cut some of them. You said they don't want to hear boring economic stuff, so I would come back if anyone wanted. But there are various terms that define our time in some ways, post-2000 onwards. There is the abstraction of labor, there is alienation. Alienation means that the work you do, those of us who are lucky to work in universities where we like our job, don't realize how terrible it is to be working somewhere for 9 hours, 8 hours, and hating every minute of that job. And in a way, alienation is part of that you have to work because otherwise you can't survive, but you really hate what you're doing. There is the reserve army of labor. The fact that the United Kingdom, for example, keeps saying we don't have unemployment. There is hidden unemployment, but more importantly, the majority of the population are in temporary, low-paid jobs that are extremely unreliable, 0 hours is one example of it, but in general, people don't have any perception of career in the ways that the pre-neoliberal economy.
Is there anywhere one can get like the statistics on that? like reliable and stuff. I mean, you go to the national website and it's like, you know, everything is good, like, you know, the
well,
birds
you
and
can
flying.
tell the kind of job people are doing. There is statistic about how many people are employed in the gig economy, which is another way of saying they're being paid very little, say on 0 hours. They get a text to say you're working today, and tomorrow they get a text. So you can get figures on the gig economy, but you can also get figures for fully employed industrial workers, and that, or skilled workers, and that is now probably, I would say, 5% of what it was in 1975.
5%.
And it would be less, as we will talk after Brexit, because we know what's happening with it. Yeah, I mean, the car industry in Oxford used to employ thousands of workers. This is now a small assembly plant for BMW, making a small version of Mini. I don't know how many there are, but I would say there's thousands. But it's one of the bigger plants. I mean, we are talking of decimation of the car industry. There's hundreds of
Is there
miles.
not in the UK maybe like more of a transition from industry to services?
Yes, true. In Europe, UK is worse than anywhere else. But Germany is facing a similar problem, as far as I can tell, right now, because of uncertainty. But I don't have exact figure. I mean, I can email you back, but I don't have I don't have it on me. But,
Sure.
yeah. What we can say is that a lot of the, if you like, what I would call the safety net of the whole system also shows cracks. One of the safety nets in any society, I think it's true of third world as well, are the middle classes. And in fact, that Monty Python caricature is quite good. Because they have aspirations of getting better, they always dominate the society. And they manage the working class, they impose their ideas on the work. And they are a stable lot. They've got maybe mortgages, so they can't be very rebellious. They have to do what they're asked for. The middle classes have lost their position in most European countries. And the reason for that is two things. A very small section of them have been moved up. They are now in the upper echelon, like they are super managers, CEOs of major companies. And they are now part of the upper class. The rest of them have been proletarianized. They are working in public sectors which face austerity post-2008. They face, we saw the junior doctors rebellion. Junior doctors should be aspiring middle class people, should be quiet. They should be the ones who are bossing around the nurses and the porters and so on. They became radicalized. Why? Because the middle classes are saying this. With the exception of Oxford and Cambridge, where people voluntarily work long hours and like to work long hours, and found out this to my own expense. Most university lecturers complain of becoming proletarianized. They say we are now no longer in the, if you like, income bracket of the middle classes. We are now almost, okay, they're still exaggerating because they still have a far better standard of living, but they do consider themselves in that. That neoliberal era had some political sides with it. One of which was, if you like, the aspirations of the Blair era, the Clinton era. We are all equal. We are going to fight prejudice. Yeah? There isn't going to be prejudice, and there's going to be equality. And I think even there, that liberalism that Putin declared dead before the G20, I think he's talking nonsense, whereas it won't die. In the same way that nationalism won't die, that is, these things might have ups and downs, but they survive. But liberalism became, if you like, the propaganda of this era, of the pre-2008. And post-2008, it faced a crisis. Because the pre-2008 idea was that we are all racially equal, we give equality It led to the Obama presidency in the United States. I think even then there was an income issue. So the presidency of Obama did not change the plight of working class poor people in Chicago or Washington, only a few hundred meters from the White House, never mind, further away. But it gave that impression of equality. The Blair era gave that impression of gender equality in this country. And there were achievements. I'm not denying that there were achievements for the number of women in the Houses of Parliament, women in various jobs. But in many ways, they failed to change anything for, if you like, a single mother who had to struggle between a temporary job, low-paid job, and childcare, and the absence of childcare. Yeah? And so, yes, I think it's Naomi Wolf, she says it was the best of time for upper-class women and sections of middle-class women, and the worst of times for the poor women, because they couldn't achieve what they were kept being told, well, we've given you equality and you can't get anywhere, so it must be that you can't be equal, can you? And so we had this. And the backlash to 2008 had elements of opposition to that liberalism. Right? Elements of angry white men, usually, often working class, but not always working class, blaming the whole economic collapse on maybe liberalism, on equality. I mean, equality. If you talk to if you have your average Brexit supporter, it's not just the European Union they don't like. They don't like equality. They say all these women have created the problem in the Houses of Parliament, or gender equality is responsible, or racial equality is responsible. So it goes beyond the economic area. It covers the political area. The economic response is also interesting because the economic response of the states wasn't to punish the banks that had created this disaster. Right? I don't know of any major CEO of a bank that has actually faced any financial difficulties for doing it. There were some minor regulations regarding banks, and I emphasize they are minor. There is a separation of the investment wing of some banks against their mortgage or whatever, against my salary going there. So my salary is a bit safer than it was, but not that much safer. And so that wasn't what was affected. The states that came to power imposed austerity. In France, in Britain, austerity was the measure. It didn't matter if you were Labour, Social Democratic, or Conservative. They all imposed the same kind of austerity. Now imagine, I have talked of the mining community because I know a bit about them, but imagine you're living in North Yorkshire, near Hull, near Durham, one of these places that has voted Brexit. You have austerity, you haven't got a job, you can't even get unemployment benefit because now you have to become part of universal credit. You can't even go and get the stamp and get your regular thing. For the housing you used to have is constantly being privatized. You are under pressure of that. But in addition to this, you have then the European Union's free movement of labor. And you don't know that the jobs that people who are coming from the European Union, you might never touch it with a barge pole. But as far as you're concerned, these people are coming and taking jobs. And the perceptions that the right-wing media, paid constantly by the very bankers, the very ministers who are part of the whole disaster, are telling you is, it's not because of 2008, it's not because of bank, it's because the Romanian has come and taken your job. What job? What job have they taken? There was no industrial workers' jobs in the UK. There was no well-paid constant job in the UK. What they've taken is fruit picking. Nobody was doing any fruit picking. Some of it went rotten. Yeah. And this concept has really built this right-wing agenda. So the liberal agenda is becoming deliberately followed by a nationalist agenda. It is deliberately blaming the foreigner. And very often the state is party to this, because the state has no perception of ordinary. This elite is so far that it has no perception of the realities that people face. In one of the poorest areas of Glasgow, where there are these towers where people live in what I would call third world conditions, they brought immigrants who were applying for asylum, some of them from our own country. Imagine you have lost your job from a factory. There's lots of car factories in Glasgow, they've all shut down. There's docks, they're all shut down. There was some shipbuildings, they've all shut down. You are unemployed, you have nowhere else. The only housing available is in this terrible tower in some godforsaken part of Glasgow. Immigrants arrive and they are refugees. They are the result, some of them, of the wars wonderful Mr. Blair did in our region, right, in order to support Mr. Bush. And they've come, and social services brings a second-hand fridge to that house. For the worker who's living above that flat or below, they say, well, what's going on here? The right-wing paper tells them the refugees are getting all this equipment and you're getting poor. So instead of blaming this on the system, on the economic crisis, on 2008, on Blair, on Bush, on anybody else, their immediate neighbor is the person they blame. And that's why they don't want refugees, they don't want immigrants, they don't want the Romanian worker. And that gives rise to this growth of nationalism. Now, many people have compared it to the 1930s. I think there are major differences. It's too long to go into all the differences, but lots of articles have been written. I recommend you read them. They do explain the differences. One thing that is common is that sections of big capital are supporting this nationalism. So you would have thought that people who became rich from the neoliberal era would want that neoliberal era to continue. They don't, because they see it reaching a political impasse. In order to recover from that impasse, they are all funding super right-wing people. Trump has Mercer, one of the biggest capitalists in the United States, supports Donald Trump. Buffett doesn't. I'm not saying all capitalists are supporting this right-wing agenda, but some are. In the United Kingdom, Brexit was supported by Stetron, the guy who did the Dyson, the creator and then the owner of the company. Stagecoach people have been, there's a lot of big capital supporting Brexit. It isn't the final solution, because there are also sections of major capital, including finance capital, which has gained a major role after the destruction of industries, is the dominant economic power in the European countries, in the United States. That finance capital does want to if you like, retain its position. That's why we have a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, who resigns the day Boris Johnson comes to power, because he is the representative of another faction of capital. But in general, there is that division. And that division is created precisely because of the impasse of neoliberalism. Very briefly, how are we doing time? Sorry.
Well, can you 10 more minutes?
Okay. I'm going to, what is the post-2005? Okay, fine, I'll try and be good. Okay, in addition to this, and I have to admit that the racism is not just this working class, there is also a growing fascism, mainly in Eastern Europe. Some of it apparently is financed by Bannon. I'm sure he's not the only person who's financing it. There is also the whole right wing in Russia, Putin's own attitude to the past. And in many ways, the disasters, this whole concept of extreme right-wing opinion wasn't dealt with during the Soviet era. They obviously survived, and that's a disaster. What we have now is this protectionism, this new forms of, if you like, the Trump opinion, and now Boris. What has the Trump tariffs and economic protectionism done? If you remember, he came to power saying, I want to make America great again. And one way he was going to make America great again was to bring back jobs to the United States. That's how he got the two working class states, Philadelphia, Virginia, other places. If you listen to business programs, such as the BBC's business program, but also if you read the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, you realize what a disaster this policy has been. Not only has no job return, which we could have said, the tariffs are making a lot of middle layer US economies bankrupt. Why? Because, for example, quite a lot of them referred to in Wall Street Journal had bought goods from China, had ordered goods from China before the tariffs. They had actually paid, and that's it, the deal is done. This was for autumn, Christmas tour 2019, which is the big spending time in the US. And they have also sold this to, they haven't bought, they've made the deal with China to buy this. They've sold it to smaller distributors all over the US. They can't get more from the distribution. They now have to pay 20% more because of the tariffs to China. So they're going bankrupt. The growth in China is now about 6. The expectation was the savior of world economy after 2008 was going to be China's economy, and the expectation was a growth of 8 to 9%. 6.5 going down is bad. What has this done to US? The growth is going down. But more importantly, jobs can't go back, because if you ask this distributor, this person who's bought the Chinese goods, okay, why don't you stop your China deal and for at least next year start employing US workers and produce the same thing? Well, here we are not talking of advanced industrial goods. I think one reporter I read in the Wall Street Journal was about someone making backpacks, right? Non-technological backpacks. And they were saying, if we made the same backpack in US, we would have to pay $40 more per bag. Right? That's why jobs don't go back, Mr. Trump. It's not because the US worker is lazy. It's not because neoliberal economy is bad. It's because you deliberately move jobs to the cheapest countries of the world. And unless a miracle happens, I would say that to Australia, but he might say something here. He will never go back. He will never go back to the United States. You can go up and down, you will never go back to the United States. So he also said that he wanted to improve the trade deficit. The trade deficit in the United States, recorded only less than a month ago, is worse than when Obama left. So he's increased it by trillions. I don't have the figure here, but by trillions. And partly the US economy is blaming the tariffs he's imposed. So basically the trade wars have created losses for the United States. But look at China. You reduce the economy of China, you affect the economy of China. The middle classes in China, I know many of them visit us, so that came here, but the middle classes are not buying luxury cars in China. Range Rover, Land Rover, what's it called? Jaguar Land Rover recently made a number of thousands of workers unemployed and blamed it directly on China's economy. You make China's, this neoliberal global economy, it was global, but you can see what happens. So you've made China's economy poor. They can't afford to buy, and they don't buy. Then 4,000 people lose their jobs in in England. So you can't make miracles, you can't change this. Protectionism in an era of global capital is cutting your own throat, basically. You go for it, you can do it, but you will be cutting your own throat. And very much the same is true. I know I'm losing.
No, it's all good.
No, gone too far. So, the Financial Times of 26 yesterday, I usually read the editorial. Like you, I'm a sucker for bad news and so on. The editorial in the FT says, well, the situation will get worse. And the reason it makes that is that it assumes it's gone through these projections of what positivist and negative economists say about the future of the economy. And the Financial Times idea is that Brexit, the slowdown in China, EU-US tariffs, which is going to be more of a problem than US tariffs against China. And EU-US tariffs are predicted September, October this year, probably post-Brexit, but we'll see, will create a problem. In the midst of all this, we also have probably the most right-wing government in the United Kingdom. I don't think it will last. I don't think it can be taken seriously. The combination of the people in it can't be taken seriously. But who knows? If he really has a secret deal with Trump, maybe he will survive. The question is, can this economy survive with all of these predictions? And it is true that Cameron and Osborne exaggerated the economic effects of Brexit. But it's also true that we haven't had Brexit yet. And therefore, what we are witnessing is really a reduction in the exchange rate, which was predicted. We are seeing a slowdown, which was predicted, but none of this is actually Brexit. So once you get to that, you really have to think about how future deals are done. And yes, you can build economic trade deals with the United States, with Canada. The problem you have is that you have an ocean between you. And it's going to cost a lot more to send or buy goods or get involved in deals than a channel that you can actually cross with a train in less than 45 minutes. So there you are. That's the summary of what I was trying to explain. I see both Brexit and Trump, the after effects of the 2008 crisis, the continuation of recession, and the fact that there isn't a solution to it. I know that political economists are talking, political scientists, not economists. Political scientists say, oh no, it's a revival of nationalism, it's the end of liberalism, and so on. I think these are the effects, the cause is deeper. And in the not so final words of Clinton, it's the economist. So there you are.
Great, on that not very glory note, we are going to finish this talk, open it to the 4 questions.